We are going to do something a little bit different today. I've actually been talking with a couple of girlfriends. A lot of them have questions about how do you talk about finances when you're dating somebody. So I figured I could bring my husband into this video and we can both talk through just our experiences with money and being in a relationship.
I think it kind of depends where you are in life. Generally, if you're younger, you're in school, you're not necessarily making a lot of money or launching a business. I think that's something perhaps brought up further down the road. But late 20s, 30s, I think that definitely comes up sooner rather than later. You probably have some goals in life, a vision for life. It's not just about money itself, but the kind of life that you want. It's probably important to do that, center that conversation sooner rather than later.
Well, what's considered sooner? How soon do you bring that up?
You're in your 20s, right? Maybe months, maybe even a year, right? In your 30s, I feel like you have first date, you're fun, you talk about some other stuff, but second, third date, I would say.
Kind of agree with that. I think in your 20s, once you decide to be exclusive, the extent of your money conversation is who pays for dates. Is it you pay, then I pay, and we switch off every other time? Do you always pay for dates? But I do agree that retirement planning or how you're going to split finances, you don't need to do any of that until you actually move in together. That to me is how I would take a look at 20s. In your 30s, I was closer to first or second date revealing all of that rather than second or third, because I personally don't want to have to date somebody that I know is not seeing the same financial future as I. If I really want to retire early and go travel the world for a couple of years, but he's like, no, I just want to work a full-time job all the time until I'm 65, then we already are we're not aligned. We don't see the future in the same way. So there's no point in going on a second date. I already in some ways wasted my time on the first date, but at least I minimized the damage and I can just move on from there. And then honestly, in my 40s, I would want all of this beforehand. I would want to know everything. At that point, it's like a merger and acquisition. Send me your financial statements. I'm serious. Don't waste my time. Send me your financial statements. What kind of debt do you have? Where do you see your financial future going? Have you done financial planning? At that point in my life, I have a vision of what I want it to be. And I don't know that I can be with somebody that doesn't share a very similar vision.
I think we disagree. It has to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe the first date doesn't have the opportunity, but definitely the second or third, but no later than that. I think being very explicit about it can be very standoffish. It could leave a sour taste in people's mouth. It could put them in a bad state of mind.
Well, what does being explicit mean?
So that's income, assets, what's in your bank account, your debt. You eventually get to those things, of course. But what do all of these things feed into? It feeds into your vision for life and how you live and what you do. So I think you start there and then you work backwards into it to see if all those tangible things are in line with that vision. For example, where are you living and how are you living? Are you in an apartment, a house, a large property? How often are you traveling? What are the luxuries that you indulge in or don't indulge in? Do you cook at all? Do you go out to eat a lot? Do you like driving a fancy car? Are you taking international vacations all the time? What kind of financial commitment come with your hobbies, children, pets? All of these things I seem like completely normal conversations, and people like talking about the things that they want to do and like to do. So I think it's very conducive to a date, but once you go over all that, then ease your way into how do you plan to live like this?
I agree with that for the most part. I think there's ways that you can deduce what their financial situation is or how, what their habits are and how that could impact you financially. The little luxuries that you brought up, I think that's a great question. What do you like spending money on, right? What's important to you? Because for some people, a designer bag is important, right? Whereas others is, no, I want to go on 3 international vacations a year. And so I do think you can learn a lot about a person depending on what their hobbies are.
Absolutely.
I do think though, in the beginning when you're dating, if it's new, I think asking those questions takes care of it. I think once you're looking to get engaged or you're looking to get married now, that's when the numbers, I think, become more important.
Yep.
right? That's when, what kind of debt do you have?
You have to get
do you
in the
have
nuts
any
and
debt?
bolts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then it's like, how do we want to handle that? Is that something that you are going to pay off on your own? Is that a burden we are both now going to share? The actual numbers and things, that becomes so imperative before you get married, because you have to find out, like, how are you going to spend your financial future together? What is together and what is separate? Because that impacts how you build wealth together too, if that's the route you take. I think a couple of people I know, they build their wealth separately, which, to be quite honest, I don't know that I agree with. Mainly because, like, also have more power when you join your money together, right? The compounding has a bigger effect that it, to me, makes no sense when married couples keep their finances completely separate. But, like, I do see value in keeping certain things that you feel are yours in your own realm versus having it be shared.
Everyone's going to have a different system, but I think you brought up a good point. Just like at some point, you do have to get into the nitty gritty. You do have to get into the details. And I think that especially becomes important if someone lays out this vision and they don't have a way to get there. And unfortunately, that happens for a lot of people. And I just don't think that's something that you can negotiate or try to manage or try to change. If someone has a grand vision and no way to get there, typically they are going to latch onto that vision even harder. So, or
to your point, like, they have the vision and they're spending like already at the vision, but they're not there. Do you remember our earliest financial discussion?
A lot of it is a blur, to be honest.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. I remember I've always been a frugal individual. One thing I remember is you brought up budgeting, which is something we do now, rightfully so. But initially, I recall I felt that, well, I'm pretty confident in my spending habits. And logging everything in a spreadsheet, it felt icky to me. I just didn't want to do it.
But why did it feel icky?
I think it was just the standalone fact of working a spreadsheet into my personal life when I'm dealing with all sorts of number crunching in my work already, was just not something that I wanted to do at the time. I think it was just purely that, just like, I got to do all this stupid stuff in Excel and numbers and think about this and that, and now I got to do it in personal life too. I also hated my job at the time, so it's probably what it was like. I want to be 3 sheets to the wind. I don't want to do any of this tracking stuff. My personal life. And I felt overconfident in my habits.
And in some ways, we balanced each other out, because this was, to me, the most fun part of my day sometimes. Being able to see how you're spending money, how we are spending money, how we're tracking to, like, overall goal, I think was exciting to me. So I was also okay taking on a lot of that burden, because it was a part of the relationship that I am just invested in, right? And I think you eventually became invested in it too, but I also felt that, I have to budget, or I have to fill out the spreadsheet, and, like, get it. You know, it's not fun, but it also gives you so much clarity on what you're spending your money on. Are you actually hitting your goals from, like, savings and investment standpoint? And ultimately, I think it answered the question for us of, like, are we on track to doing what we want with our future? And is our finances supporting that?
Well, the argument is ironclad. I think it's just like, it was the emotions around it. Sometimes people talk about, like, you have a watch and then, like, constantly checking your watch and you're beholden to the time. I think some of that apprehension was that fear of, like, this tool will then force me into certain decisions that I don't want to make.
What do you think got you over that fear?
I think once things got more complex, because we talked about this, I think maybe a year or 2 or a few months into living together, but we're just on our salaries, paying the rent, buying cheap takeout most of the time. So I think there was also that feeling like, what's this spreadsheet going to tell me? But then once you start thinking about investments and vacations and the retirement accounts, that can all fit up here. There's no argument for that. So once I felt that weight and I saw this needs to be in front of me, there's no running from it anymore.
This I remember very specifically because it was something that I think bothered me a lot. It was, I think, when we were first dating, we were already a couple of dates in and stuff, and you were very insistent that we split everything all the time. And I think for me, a relationship was more, you know, you pay for like a meal or something one day, and then I pay for the next day, and then we kind of just continue switching on and off. So I remember actually having that discussion with you because I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to split everything in half all the time. It feels very transactional versus like, oh, okay, you take this one, I take the next one. And eventually I think things will even out. I think at the time we both also saw a future with each other. I think we both saw like we can really be together long term and get married to the point where it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, like, we're going to end up together.
I think this is just a broad miscalculation on my part. I think it feeds into the same thing as what was going on with the budgeting in the spreadsheet. Instead of like doing a spreadsheet, so if there ever was a problem, there'd be something there. I think it was just out of fear of, oh, we'll do this stupid little chore every time we buy something or do something, so we don't have to do anything ever, right? I think that's kind of where, I think it came from the same place. We'll equalize right now, and that means there'll never be a problem.
Do you remember the first time I told you about a Roth IRA? You were excited about it. And I was like, Gary, make sure you contribute to this every single year. I think for like 2 or 3 years, you just put in, the max at the time was only 5K. So he put in 5K, but then he didn't actually do anything with it. And I kept begging him. I was like, Gary, you have to actually invest it, because if you just leave it there, you're not even earning interest on it. It's just sitting there depreciating every single year because of inflation. And I think at some point, like, you just let me do it. You were like, here, just take it. This is my login information. And that ended up actually being a really great decision given how much it's grown. But at the time, I was so frustrated with you because you can't just leave the money sitting there. You actually have to invest it in stocks and buy something in order for it to grow. So I think that was maybe one of our, I wouldn't say like arguments, but like discussions that we had around our finances.
I don't remember much of anything before the spreadsheet era, to be honest.
This is the problem. We've been together for like 12 years now, so it's hard to remember all the things. I think when we moved in together, I think is when it got complicated.
Right.
And we, at the time, I think our salaries were relatively close. So we just said, let's just split everything 50-50. It just made sense that way. We were pretty much both doing something very similar. We put similar amounts into our 401k. We were both contributing to our Roth IRA and maxing it out. So I think for us, it just made the most sense to do it that way. Mm-hmm. Rent, for sure, we were 50-50. I think there were certain things that were connected to like his account because we moved in before we got married. So I think rent, I can't remember whether rent was connected to my account or connected to your account, but it was one of our accounts.
We didn't have the joint. Right?
We didn't have a joint at the time. So one of us paid the full amount and then the other person was reimbursed. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of why we ended up budgeting or doing our budget numbers like in the middle of the month, because we reconciled everything that we split. And then whoever owed money at the end of the day to the other person would just Zelle or Venmo or something, right, so that we were even. Right. So that's pretty much how we took care of it at the time.
Right. And then once we got married, we had our joint account, which makes everything so much easier.
It does. And then at that point, we pretty much we connected our joint account to a lot of our expenses. So rent was automatically deducted from there. Mm-hmm. I think what we tried to do was we aligned on how much we were both going to put into that joint account every single month. That way we could pay for groceries and all of that. And that pretty much spawned from our budgeting spreadsheets, because once we saw how much we were spending per month, we knew how much we should both contribute in order to keep that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And then there were certain times when like, we went on vacation, we went on trips, and like, I would pay for certain things, you would pay for certain things. And then at the end, we would try to like reconcile to see where we landed. But for the most part, I think we end up pretty even.
Yep.
So it's like one person would essentially take the flights and like hotels, and then the other person would like cover all the ground expenses. And that was enough to make it relatively even. So I think for the most part, that's how we manage things. And then when it comes to, I would say like our retirement accounts and like our investment brokerage account, we not only have a joint checking account, but we have a joint savings account. We have multiple joint savings accounts actually, but we agreed to contribute a certain amount every single month to that joint account. I think it's like however much basically we don't spend, all of it would just go there so that we could grow our wealth. And again, I think the benefit of being in a couple is that you can save more money or invest more at once, which then compounds faster than if you were to do it individually. we just combined everything. And when we do our net worth calculations, it's the same exact way. His retirement accounts are essentially the same as my retirement accounts. We both view it as each other's money, so that when we get older and when we have to live off of our retirement accounts, we're going to live off of each other's essentially. So it's not like I can only live off of mine, he can only live off of his. I think that's
all in the pot now.
We see it as one thing versus like individual accounts. And then I think we still have our individual individual checking accounts,
right,
for random expenses that like we have as individuals, but for the most part, everything is together.
All the major stuff, recurring stuff. I think there are some overlaps with the first question, but now I think this comes down to habits and the data and the commitments and the vision and the plan and the actions. Because if you do not have this, you're going to have very big problems. It's like a vector. You could be diverging in completely different directions. You're going to have a bad time. You're going to come into conflict. There's going to be confusion. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be misunderstanding. It's going to be very hard to manage. It really is a core part of life and how you want to live. Do you want to work for 40 years at this job? Some people don't. Do you want to live in a house or an apartment? All these things are connected. It's core and inherent to your lifestyle.
I agree with you. I think finances and financial conversations are baked into every single thing that we do every single day. And I think for me, the most important things to discuss before getting married are discussing your future, right? And how you're getting there. So not only do we see a very similar path for ourselves, but we have a plan for getting there, right? Especially if we want 2 or 3 kids. Is there going to be a nanny? Is there daycare? Like, can we afford that? Like, how much are we going to have to pay for that? I think family planning is actually very important, and not many people think about that until, they have a baby.
And you're in it.
And then it becomes a little tougher to manage, right? When you plan for that ahead of time, it's easier to then say, we have a good enough nest egg or enough saved up or invested that like could do X, Y, Z if we wanted to.
If you fail to plan to fail.
So I think financial future is a really big one, or just future in general. The second is just revealing all of your cards, like you said, right? So it's like being very transparent about what you have in terms of debt, assets, and then what you're actually going to combine / not. And I actually think that's where the prenup comes in, because as you're older and you accumulate more assets, right? Like if I had a rental property before we met, I don't know that that's something I would want to join together necessarily, right? Everyone's different. But I think if I had certain assets that I worked really hard to get, I don't know how I would feel about having to share joint custody of that, and then also potentially having to like lose half of that in like a divorce, for example.
And prenup isn't the only option. There's postnup as well. You can structure agreements pretty much at any time, at any point. And also, fun fact, you can open bank accounts with anybody. You don't necessarily need to be married. You can purchase property with anybody. You don't necessarily need to be married. But once you do get married and now the state is involved and there's tax implications involved, everything simply needs to go on the table, or else you're simply going to run into issues.
And I think the topic of a prenup is still misunderstood, or
there's a stigma with it, but I think that's problematic. More times than not, it really isn't going to be in the best interest of everyone.
It's funny. I think we never thought about having a prenup, only because, I mean, there wasn't really anything we had by the time we got married. When did we get married? Like when you were 27, I was 26. Right? So we were relatively young. We were just starting out in like careers. Like really didn't have anything worth outlining in a document. I do think now it might actually be like something good for us to reflect on for a postnup. And this is actually something we discussed before, where we were like, what are the instances in which we would like activate a postnup?
Mhm.
And I think what we aligned on was one, if one of us expects like a really big inheritance, not that it's actually going to happen, but it was more like theoretical, like what is actually going to trigger this. And I think the other one was like, if we were going to start our own businesses, like, how would we would handle that and what that treatment looks like, I think was important for us to discuss.
Some sort of very big venture or
Yeah.
massive windfall. In any event, some sort of massive change.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily have a conflict. I think one, we've been very open and transparent with each other. So there's not really like a moment where we like maybe fought about finances. Also, we're very similar, I think, in how we spend money and how we approach money. So that's not really like a hot topic for us.
When we first really started thinking about active investing instead of passive investing, so hands-on with certain stocks and real estate especially, I remember I was extremely apprehensive about that. Because again, it really came back to the fear. I had a very strong tendency to think about the worst case scenario. I don't know why. I remember reading some sort of like quote somewhere, you're about to make an investment, you have to be okay with the worst case scenario, which I think maybe works in very narrow circumstances. But for some reason, I just applied that approach. So I was just very apprehensive to getting hands-on. And I think that was a big source of conflict. I was very wanted to go. I was very apprehensive. And I think from what I recall, I got to a point of this is what we have to do. It lays the foundation for so much. And once we started actually looking at things, I think it was you just wearing me down. But in the end, it really was for the better. And I look back on it, like, I don't even know where that mentality went. I can't even grasp it in my mind anymore, because it's like jumping into a pool of cold water or the ocean, and you dip your toes in. It feels super cold, but you just dunk your head in and then it feels fine. You just have to go for it once, and then you don't have that type of fear or apprehension anymore.
I think that's also why you're hesitant to like invest the money you deposited in your Roth IRA. Like, you're in some ways taking a risk. The stock market is a risk at the end of the day. Many investments are a risk because it's not FDIC insured. You just don't leave it in a bank. But I always like to think of it this way. Inflation will always eat at your money.
Right.
So you're either guaranteeing yourself a 3% loss every single year, or you're at least going to potentially give yourself the opportunity to earn 10% year over year, or 7% year over year adjusted for inflation. I think I've always been less, I guess, hesitant on it because of my concern over building wealth. I was so concerned with like future and like making sure we had enough money that I was like, I'm willing to risk it. I'm willing to invest in something and see how it does. Like, what do we have to lose at this point? You know, it's like we already kind of had not nothing, but like we already had so little that to me it also felt less risky in some ways to actually invest.
What do we got to lose?
Yeah, we almost didn't have anything to lose. Like the real estate piece has always just been fascinating to me. I actually don't know why I never went into real estate. I feel like in some ways I should have. But the whole process and leveraging real estate to build wealth has, I think, been a very interesting topic for me. And that's kind of why I wanted to invest in real estate and like start buying property, because it was another tool for us to accumulate wealth and grow our assets without us having to like pay for a mortgage, right? Because then the renter ends up paying for it. So I liked that aspect of it. I think we've learned so much by investing in real estate on our own and just trying to figure things out that I think that we have some non-negotiables now, right? We don't want to buy a place with an HOA because we've had some terrible experiences with it. HOAs can go up by like 20% like over year, and there's nothing you can do about it. I know some people love to say, well, then just plan for it. But who plans for a 20% increase in an HOA? Who plans for a 20% increase in the property tax, which is happening in Jersey City right now? Yeah. Nobody ever plans for that.
I think this was another conflict of just like sometimes there's an HOA with no scope and you feel like you're just throwing money out the window, which you're just paying for the common insurance. But then you have an HOA that has a large amount of scope, which seems great until they actually need to come through on those services. And now you're dependent on them and you don't have any control. And if you were to get hands-on, now it's on you. And I think it was at these conflict points we realized it's not worth it to be in this position anymore.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that first?
I think we touched upon them a bunch already, so I can go quickly.
Okay.
Rapid fire. Gotta track things. You need quantitative data. You need the information to make action. Inflation is the secret tax, and you will lose if you do not play. The time when people are most successful is when everyone else is panicking, like we saw in real estate. Sometimes you just got to dive in to, can't let the fear hold you back when it comes to investments and being hands-on. As you were talking about before, I didn't do anything with my Roth IRA. It seems absolutely crazy to me now. So it's just like, if you're sitting there asking like, where do I even start? That's not a death sentence. It's pretty darn easy with the amount of resources that are out there to get acquainted pretty quickly and figure out how all these things work and what accounts to set up and what you should do with them. You can get there quickly, even though it seems extremely daunting.
So the worst financial lesson. So we've actually talked about this, but what came up in my mind is speculating, right? Speculation, I think, is the worst financial lesson that I've learned. I think at some point when I started investing in the stock market, this was on our joint account. We do have individual stocks that we invested in, but we also have ETFs and things like that we invest in for diversification. At some point, I went a little risky and I said, oh, we're going to buy SPAC company, a special, I forgot what the actual name or acronym stands for, but essentially they went public or they're listed on stock exchange, but they have no revenue. They're sometimes even like pre-revenue. Like, right? So obviously it's a terrible idea to invest in them. It is a terrible idea. So don't do that. But there was a time, I think maybe in 2021, where SPAC was just a thing. It happened for so many companies and there was a lot of hype around them. And I bought into it, right? Not, of course, with all of our dollars, but we did buy into a company that ended up going bankrupt. Or like, our most expensive financial lesson is to not think that you are the next best stock anticipator, but to instead invest in things that are, one, proven, that actually have a track record, and two, if you really don't want to keep up with like news and how the companies are doing and their earnings reports, like ETFs and index funds are the best ways to invest because it will just naturally lower your risk. Diversification. So I think that was the biggest lesson for me. It was when we started investing early, I felt very confident, and the market was also doing so well that I was like, oh, great, we could take a little bit more of a risk and let's invest in this like smaller company. And if it ends up doing really well and explodes, great. But I think the reality is most of these companies don't do well, right? Like 90% of them fail. And for us to have like invested in it was honestly kind of silly. But at the end of the day, like, still survived it. And I will say this kind of ties into the money conflict one because we did lose money on it. The good thing is, however, is that if you lose money in the stock market, you can use that as a tax offset. So it's in handy for us.
Because we made gains somewhere else and that was able to offset.
Exactly.
So when you're doing things right, it's never a total loss.
No, but obviously it's never good to also lose money.
Right.
So that was a lesson, but that's okay. I think everybody makes mistakes at the end of the day. It's just more how you handle it and how you move on from there.
I think, so there's that phrase of, oh, the time in the market is more important than timing the market. That's well and good. If your intent is, I'm going to focus on my career and I just want to put my money somewhere just so it gains and beats inflation, that's a great strategy. But let's say you want to have some time being hands-on, there are other things you can do besides just throwing it into index and ETF, and it might help as well, because if everything is in an index and the index is weighted toward tech and tech goes down, it's going to be really tough to look at that. So I think we all have options in life, and I think there are many avenues to explore. There are many ways to be active investing and passive investing, as long as you adhere to the fundamentals. You don't let fear consume your decisions. You approach things with intent and you communicate with your partner.
All right, well, that was a great wrap up. Let us know if you like this video. We can create more. If you leave questions down below, we're happy to answer them. Bye.